Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Better Managers Briefing. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of the CMI, and every Friday at this time, we bring you views on management matters that matter. And today, I'm delighted to welcome two of our CMI partners and companions who are very active in the field of education. So please join me in welcoming Paul Geddes. He is the CEO of QA, and former CEO of Direct Line and a dear old pal from Procter & Gamble, and Tim Stewart, who is the Vice-Chancellor of BPP University. Welcome to you both. Nice to see you. Now, obviously, skills and education very top of mind in this pandemic. How do you think it's going to change the way education is developed and delivered, and what do you think the longer term impacts will be for the sector and learner experience? Tim, what do you think?
Well, obviously, the whole world was taken by surprise last year, and the short-term delivery impact was everything needing to go online very, very quickly. I think we were a bit lucky at BPP because we had 10 years of online education, and so the teaching aspect of that was pretty straightforward. But I know for a number of institutions, that was in itself a very, very challenging feat. I think the really exciting thing for me in 2020 as an awarding body was actually being able to move assessment online, and to have hundreds and hundreds of exams with thousands of students up and down the country, sitting exams under supervision and being able to continue to get credit and to graduate. That for me was the really, really big accomplishment last year. Inevitably, after the pandemic, some of this will move back. But I think we will see a much, much more significant role for online teaching, online assessment, online socializing, online libraries. I think it's going to be a very significant part, and particularly for the employed learner.
That's really interesting. Paul, what do you think? Do you agree with that assessment of the longer term impacts?
Well, we had a similar exciting few weeks getting everything to digital delivery, and I want to thank my team for doing an amazing job. And we didn't miss a beat in that. And I think, like all organisations, I think the accelerated process is already ongoing. I think in our sector, I think one of the things to distinguish between is digital delivery and live learning. And we do a mixture of both. We have a platform called Cloud Academy, which is on-demand learning. But what we've persisted with throughout this is live learning, which is now delivered digitally for students and apprentices and learners. And we're doing as much live learning now in December as last December versus pre-pandemic. So that's gone from largely in classroom to 250 classrooms being closed, but that live learning carrying on. And we're big believers that live learning, however technical a topic is, live is really good. Live means that you're focused, you're going to turn up, you're going to pay attention and not be distracted because your trainer could ask you a question at any time. It's interactive, you can ask questions. You're part of a cohort that can learn from each other, and the subject matter can be tailored to your understanding. So we're just massive believers in live, and we think live will persist. But live, we think, will be increasingly blended with digital, and there are some use cases where live's brilliant, some where digital's brilliant.
Okay.
Now, then our classrooms are going to reopen, and then the question is, what's going to happen then? I do think physical also does have a role. I do think that if you're in a cohort of other learners, the fact you can go and have a cup of coffee with them and chat, stuff like behavioral training, we think is really, really well done in a class. If you're doing a simulation of a cyber attack, is one of the things which we do, having some adrenaline in the room also is a kind of a good thing to be done physically. But it won't go all the way back to where it was in terms of physical attendance.
Sure. So some big changes then. Now, what about the skills that matter to employers and to learners? What do you think they will be? Are they all going to be technical, or do you think there's an even greater role for the human skills like empathy and communication? What do you think, Paul?
Well, Anne, I empathise with you on that and agree with you. Now, listen, our whole business is kind of in the tech skills space, and I think clearly the crisis has made, again, as I said, every business a tech business. And I don't think there's any sector where not being good at tech isn't important. It's pretty existential for companies. Now, the good news on tech, of course, is that everyone now has access to these amazing platforms so that tech is available to small and big companies alike. But that then throws what will differentiate companies is how they use tech. And tech skills, as we know, there aren't enough to go around. and particularly there aren't enough diverse skills, and there aren't enough skills in various parts of the country. So our whole stick is about building that tech. And the great news is, actually, if people have got the right attitude and aptitude, then in like 14 weeks, you can get people really proficient in modern technology, sufficient to actually have a really good job and start a really good tech career. But not everyone can do that. About 20% of people, we think, in the general population can. Now, that 20% aren't all STEM graduates. And the great thing is we always go out and we have about 100,000 applicants a year. We look for attitude and aptitude, and then we can teach them the tech. So that's kind of, I suppose, kind of good news, really, especially for a diversity angle. Now, what I'd also say is when we have these people for our boot camps, we also teach them soft skills, because if you're in the world of tech, you need to be part of agile scrum teams that interact, and you therefore do need empathy, you need problem solving, and increasingly you need leadership. If you want to go up a tech career, you need leadership skills as well. So I think both are important, Dan, and obviously we have a little bit of a bias for those tech skills.
Yes, I can see, but what do you think, Tim? How important are the human skills?
Well, I'd say we also have a technology school, and we're very much in the space that Paul's in, but we also operate in areas like law and nursing and banking and accounting. So you get that slightly broader perspective of how the world of employment is seeing skills. And I think in the very early stages of the COVID crisis, the surveys we did of employers, a lot of what they were coming back with was, how do you work online as a team? What is resilience, and how do we get that into our workforce, and self-management and agility, and a lot of things that didn't relate specifically to technology, but more to do with the human skills of working with technology in the new environment. I think if you look beyond the pandemic, the skills that are going to be needed, the really important ones at the top of all the survey lists, remain things like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving. But it's certainly true that a few places further down that list, we're seeing more and more technology, data, and digital, both the foundational skills and the real expertise that is going to be at the heart of so many future roles. So I think all these things remain very important. Skills are critical. And if anything, we need to move the bar in all of those different areas for future roles. Yeah,
well, skills are certainly critical. And, we do have a current education infrastructure in this country. Do you think it's fit for purpose? Do you think that how universities, colleges, and other training providers interact with communities needs to change? And how can we get more diversity into the delivery of education? Paul mentioned getting more diverse learners. What about diversity in delivery? Maybe, Tim, I'll start that one off with you this time.
Yeah, so on the infrastructure, a lot of money is spent on education around the world. It's something like 6% of global GDP. So these are trillions and trillions of dollars that are poured into education. If you look at that, a lot of it is to an old model. Infrastructure is mostly about physical infrastructure. It's most about the traditional sort of sized campuses and facilities that we're all familiar with, from schools through to universities. At BPP, we always adopted a slightly different approach. We've got a more distributed campus model across all the major cities and urban areas of Britain, so that we can provide for national employers, who have people everywhere. But also we put a lot of our effort into building the digital infrastructure, not just for the COVID crisis, but seeing this as increasingly very important. If you look around the country, and indeed around the world, there's only a tiny fraction of educational resource that's directed towards technology. It's under 4%. That is a very, very low figure when you look at the demands on these institutions now. How are we going to run Wi-Fi for thousands of people on campuses? How are we going to connect all across the country to those thousands of learners who are logging on to assessment platforms and social platforms and teaching platforms? There is a massive digital infrastructure that needs to be built, and that, I think, is perhaps the most important thing we need to look at alongside property.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Paul, what are your thoughts about that? How the infrastructure needs to evolve?
Well, I suppose slightly backing up, the fact that I suppose higher education, which is one of the things that we do as well, is so front loaded. I think you kind of have to stand back and go, each topic is 200 hours, and you need to do 6 a year, and then you do 3 years, and so that's massively front loading your education, which is great, and but it's taking up years and a lot of money. And actually, our assessment is that you're probably going to need to come back to education in some format through your career, because your job may change, your role may well change. So I think, credit bearing, micro credentials, I think these are all kind of buzzwords, but I do think those are kind of important, and funding obviously doesn't keep up with that. Funding is all kind of lumpy. So I do think kind of at that level, I think that needs to be looked at. I think the second thing is the role of employers. And I think, again, employers, I think, aren't always at the heart of how some of these products are designed. We do a lot of degree apprenticeships, and there we'd love to offer employers much more of a kind of smorgasbord of what matters to them in terms of creating courses that work for everybody. So that we can mix, a bit of accounting and a bit of technology, and the standards don't currently allow that. So I do think that, pulling employers into the creation of content and having standards which are more flexible. And then I think kind of finally, and I'm with Tim on this one, I think that the modality, how training is offered to fit alongside people's lives. Our higher education business works on offering our students 2 days a week of classroom training. So that's kind of 2 days a week, or evenings and weekends. And what that means is that it can be fitted around a job, care responsibilities, family. And our learners are on average 10 years older than most undergraduates, and they manage to hold down other responsibilities, and yet they still get the same educational attainment. And towards the end of that, we love to give them work experience, and for our master's students, make that credit bearing. And we only do vocational subjects with very high employability. So again, a new model. 2-year degrees, I think, is a new model. So I think HE is a great thing. I think a lot of it is really good, but I do think it needs to flex and keep up with the modern world.
Yeah, those are very good points. By the way, if you have a question for Paul or Tim, please put it in the chat. We're going to be taking questions later on in the broadcast, so do ask your question. Now, you mentioned, both of you, that the importance of skills, and Paul, you mentioned lifetime skills. The government's talking about lifetime skill guarantees. There's a recent white paper talking about adult education and FE education. What do you make of that? What's your advice for the government? And are there examples that you've seen of best practice? Paul, why don't I start that with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the government clearly understands the kind of critical economic role of skills, and just a kind of couple of numbers. The skills gap is being measured at losing the UK economy £63 billion a year, and the sector will contribute £200 billion to the economy by 2025. So I think the government has recognised that and has committed in the autumn spending review to spend £138 million to help fund technical courses. So just a few thoughts on kind of potentially how to spend some of that money, because we're part of that spending. The first one is we love boot camps, and we've been working in Greater Manchester, funded by DCMS, on boot camps, and they take about 8 to 10 weeks. We look for people, as I said, with those kind of attributes, an attitude for tech, but no knowledge. And 8 to 10 weeks later, these guys and girls, importantly girls, are highly employable, and that model has worked so well that that's now in national rollout. So I think that's fantastic. So
let me just back up there. You mentioned the girls. What can you give us an idea about how diverse those learners are in these boot camps?
Well, we can target, and we do target, to have full gender diversity. We don't always achieve that, but because we're looking through some of the biases that exist in what people tend to learn as subjects, and we're just again looking for that underlying propensity, which is not a gender-driven propensity. Now we then have to do a job of making tech roles attractive to everybody, and we do an awful lot of stuff in lots of forums to make tech jobs attractive to both genders, because there is a gender bias in preference for the career. But that's one of the things that as we roll these boot camps out, absolutely, we're looking for that gender diversity. And then, as I say, Anne, 8 to 10 weeks later, these people are really employable, and so that's great. That's in rollout. I think the next thing is employers, I think, could do with some nudging to reskill rather than make people redundant and then hire a different bunch of people for tech roles, particularly. And enlightened employers, we do a lot with Nationwide. They take people that used to be in branches, for example, retain the business knowledge and make them DevOps engineers, again, 14 weeks later. Now, that actually takes quite a lot of planning because you need to work out the roles you're going to need fewer of and the roles more of, and it's quite a lot of investment, and it's 3 or 4 months off the job. And again, if the government could kind of nudge and reward companies that I think do that reskilling, it's just so much better for everyone. The business knowledge, the culture gets retained. All of that 30 years working in a branch means people understand customers and understand processes. I think a nudge in that would be really good. And finally,
Sorry, I was going to say that's an excellent point, but go on. You have one more, and then we'll come to you.
I think the final one is the apprenticeship levy, which again we love deeply, but it's forced that we do that over like 18 months or 12 months. Why couldn't we use that apprenticeship levy in a very much a kind of concentrated boot camp? We're real believers that actually, if you stay in a subject like all the week and do it for 3 months, you really can learn a lot very quickly. And if you spread it out over 18 months, it sometimes can be less effective. So why can't we use our apprenticeship levy in a very much upfront way? That's me.
Okay, some great advice there. Tim, what's your advice?
So I would start with the apprenticeship levy, and I think my advice to government would be to remind them what a fantastic policy the apprenticeship levy was for large-scale systematic investment in education. And I think tech, which Paul's talking about, does have this acute sort of short-term boot camp concentrated model that really does work well for the sort of reskilling. But if you look at the broader needs of a wider range of businesses and sectors and disciplines, I think the apprenticeship format really is the right format, and it can be as less than a year, and it can stretch for 4 or 5 years for certain sorts of disciplines. But the thing that I would remind government is that at the heart of this was to put the employer in the driving seat. It was the idea that employers are best placed to identify the skills gaps that they've got and to direct their money to support those skills gaps, which will inevitably be very, very different depending on your size and the industry you're in. And government, Department of Education are not well placed to make those judgments. What unfortunately I think has happened is because the initial numbers didn't take off as fast as people wanted, there's been more interference, more attempts to tell people what they should be doing, which courses are okay to study, which aren't, which levels. And I think that is detracting from what was originally a very, very good policy. I myself was part of the CMI Trailblazer group for the degree apprenticeship. I also uniquely was part of the team that designed the full-time management degree in higher education. I was on both groups. And what was fantastic about the degree apprenticeship was that employer engagement, having employers from different disciplines, different sizes in the room, working with educators to create the right sort of learning outcomes, to create the right sort of program that actually would create the generation of managers that we so badly need in this particular country. And that's what I'd want to say to government. Put the employers back in the driving seat, allow them to invest where they feel they really, really need that. And that might well include the higher skill roles at level 6 and 7. And I think that's something that unfortunately is proving harder and harder to argue, but it's what we should be doing.
So I think that's a great point. We're very proud of having led with people like yourself and employers the development of the management apprenticeships. They are very popular. They are actually growing. And again, a lot of the apprenticeships that perhaps have fallen off were some of the lower quality ones. That's the point really that you're making. And Paul, your point on reskilling, and Tim, you're saying that the higher levels are vital. I think that's very important too, because you never have to stop managing and leading and learning how to do that better. And as we've seen in this crisis, it's incredibly important. It should be at the heart. Now, my final question before we take questions, we have a lot of learners that like these sessions. What advice are you going to give them about how they can best maximize their educational outcome and future prospects? Paul, what would you say?
So I'm fortunate enough to have 2 daughters, one 20 and one 22. One's in a graduate scheme, and one's just thinking about what to do with her degree. And I think always the danger of everything is to take your parents' advice, because your parents, I think, have a mental model for how the world works, which is kind of probably out of date. We, I think, have a view of, you learn a thing and then that's what you do for the rest of your life. And I think that is not the model, unfortunately or fortunately. So I think I think people shouldn't listen too much. They should listen to lots of aspects of their parents' advice. But I think on the specific topic of, well, what are you going to do with your life, and then spend, work, do your education until 28 and then do that for the rest of your life, probably isn't a model that's going to be available outside maybe the law and medicine and a few other places. So I think having a mental model that reskilling is going to be a lifelong journey, and that's good, and hold potentially some money and some time in your kind of life plan back for those moments. I think the other point is, I think, to be somewhat fleet of foot, and take some personal responsibility for making sure your skills are what the market not only needs now, but it's going to need in the future. I don't think government's going to do that as well as you are yourself. And I think, therefore, being curious about the economy, curious about technology, curious about industries, and don't always go for the ones that sound fun. Do the research. There's lots of great industries. I used to be in insurance. It's a great industry. It doesn't sound that exciting, but it's, if you understand it. So I think just take some responsibility to understand trends, understand where, what are the great jobs going to be created in Britain in 5 and 10 years time, and try and anticipate that.
Super.
I think
so don't listen to your parents. And
the final one, back to your soft skills point. The jobs which will not be automated will be the ones that are inherently human. And of course, I'm saying you need tech is a kind of a key building block of any career, but I think really it is curiosity for learning, it's softer skills, it's empathy, creativity. These will be the essential skills which will define jobs done by humans in the future, rather than those automated. So again, that is, you and I know people that are the cleverest and the most accomplished, but they don't get on in their jobs because they can't work with people, or they can't lead, or they're all of those things. So I do think, again, a reminder that those soft skills are really important in the career.
Thanks for that. And Tim, what's your advice?
I've got 2 optimistic points to end on here. First of all, learning. I genuinely don't think there has been a better time in the history of the world to learn. And I often dealing with students, and I myself have got 2 children, 2 boys at secondary school, and there's often a sense that there's great barriers and problems and difficulties. But honestly, particularly through the internet, through the range of podcasts and resources that are available out there, YouTube videos such as this one, there are so many things now that you can draw on to improve your knowledge and to improve your skills beyond any formal education or qualifications that are available. During lockdown, like many people, I had a little bit more time, and I was learning the piano off an app. I was learning Polish off an app. I've been trying to, improve myself in various ways, and I found that technology is there, to help me relatively inexpensively as well to do those things. So education is available, and formal education has never been more accessible through technology. The ability not only to learn through teaching online, but the fact that awarding bodies can actually assess you and give credit. We graduated over 6,000 students last year during the pandemic sort of lockdowns. It is possible to continue to be educated. The second thing is obviously about career prospects, and we do see record numbers of redundancies, and we see a lot of gloom, and it is likely that a number of those variables will stay high for some time, if not semi-permanently. But I think the optimistic note here, if you look at something like the World Economic Forum, they're saying that more jobs are going to be created by technology than lost, and they're going to be more interesting, and they're going to be higher skilled. And even today, there are 500,000 vacancies in this country, and recruiters are saying they can't find the candidates. It isn't that there's a lack of jobs, it's that there's a lack of skills. And so you've got to do everything you possibly can to gain those skills. Go to online events, read up on things, listen to podcasts, learn from people, take opportunities that you can, gain the skills that are important for the future, both interpersonal and technological, and you will be very well placed to have a rewarding and exciting career that will be better than anyone in history.
Well, there you go. There's a really optimistic rallying cry to end on. We're going to take some questions now. Our first question is from Stewart. One of the issues we face in Wales is the inability in some areas of the country for students to get broadband. Also, our students in China face issues getting access to our platforms. Thoughts, Paul? Thoughts for Stewart?
Well, Anne, you know all these people. I think you need to call your friends at OpenReach and BT and help with that. I think the China issue might be slightly different. I'm not sure, Tim, whether you've got any subject matter knowledge on that.
Okay, we'll pass China to Tim. How do we? Any advice for Stewart?
I mean, it is very difficult. I mean, we most of our international students are more in India and Pakistan and so on, and it has been very challenging. There's no doubt about that. And although I agree with what Paul said about live learning earlier and how powerful it is, and we're the same, we offer a lot of live learning. There are many people in the world for whom that just simply isn't an option at the moment because of the infrastructure that's simply not in place. And that goes back to my earlier point that, we are going to have to find the resources globally to be able to build the capability for people to access education. And if you look back at the history of the world, you look at the big industrial revolutions, there was massive change in things like education and infrastructure to be able to take advantage of the prosperity leaps. Schools were founded because of the Industrial Revolution. Universities were created for that. And similarly, a lot of this IT technology, is going to need to be put in place if we're going to reap the benefits of Industrial 4.0. So there will be a period where that is not equal. And that does worry me, because clearly some people are going to be able to leap forward faster than others. But it should be a government priority. This is what government should be doing. Yeah, this is something that government can get behind, the building of national infrastructure, not telling people which courses to study.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the next question is from Kelly, and it's for you, Paul. Paul, boot camps sound great for hothouse learning knowledge. How about mindset shift and behavioral change? For example, with degree apprenticeships, are they better suited to mindset shift, or can you do that in a boot camp?
Yeah, I mean, I think the classroom is better suited to some things than others, and I do think that actually the other thing which we like to do is for behavioural stuff is get teams out as a team, get them out the workplace. So that's we've got these 250 classrooms, and when they open up, we want them full of teams, and it's that feedback amongst a team I think is really important. I mean, in my kind of career, the most breakthrough moments you've got is when you get out the office and you actually do tell people the impact they have on the other person. You do fire OB, you do all these other techniques, because it's amazing how you think you come across, and often you don't, and you unintentionally send off signals about what you want back, and so there's no real substitute, I think, for getting teams out and having teams giving that feedback. And I think companies can do an awful lot also to get a culture of feedback into the organization and tools to facilitate that, and not make performance reviews this once a year thing. And Anne was my first boss, and you can see that not much has rubbed off, but Anne, you were very good at giving feedback, right? But I think feedback often you can give on performance, but I think feedback on these other human skills, I think, is absolutely essential. I think it's hard. It's not a thing with a blackboard. I do think it has to be done in the actual team, because it's slightly artificial out of the classroom. But the classroom's a good place to pull the team in and get that disclosure. It takes about a day, I'd say, to break down the barriers, to actually get into the real conversations often, and for people to have the confidence. You only give feedback to someone you trust and you like. So I think it takes some technique, and it takes some commitment, and it takes some time to break those barriers down. But it's the most valuable thing you can get. If I think about those pivots in your career, it's when you've had that feedback about unintentionally the impact you have on other people, and the ability to correct that.
Absolutely, and that can be a good or a bad impact. We have time just for one more question here from Helen on what plans are there to ensure that digital delivery is the right sort of delivery for students with additional needs, both students and pupils in the mainstream, as well as SEN educational establishments. Tim, what do you think?
Well, it is a huge topic, and it's one that education institutions are wrestling with all the time. There are emerging standards and best practices that we're all very aware of and working towards. There's a great variety in that space. There are all kinds of things to do with the way colours, for instance, are presented on screens, right the way through to people with hearing problems or various other learning challenges. And I think it is the role of education providers to be able to adapt and to provide a whole range of different ways with which people can accomplish the learning outcomes. And for me, as a Vice-Chancellor, some of the proudest moments, is seeing somebody, with a particular condition that is very, very challenging, managing to succeed. Somebody who is completely blind, managing to actually do a law degree, or somebody with autism managing to get to a professional standard. I mean, these are phenomenal achievements, but they do require the sort of skills we talked about earlier. You have to be creative, you have to solve problems, you have to develop technology in different ways. So all the things we've talked about are the ways in which we solve the sort of the educational problems of allowing everybody to come on the journey with us.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any final words from you, Paul, on this topic?
No, I do think, again, you talk about blended learning, but I think that the fact that you can, people can take a bit more time on stuff they find more difficult, and people can follow slightly different paths. People have different preferences for how they learn. Some people think, visual, and some people are all, oral. I think all the smorgasbord of learning options that technology enables people to do, I think, means that people's different learning styles and people's different abilities shouldn't be a detriment to picking up a great education.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. And their technology, again, is our friend because it enables a lot of this. Well, you've both provided great food for thought and sounded a rallying cry for how to take advantage of this time of learning, and don't listen to your parents. But thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paul and Tim, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you've enjoyed this conversation and want to find out more about CMI, please click the link in the chat. And thanks, Paul and Tim. And join me next week when we'll be celebrating National Apprentice Week, National Apprenticeship Week, and talking with some of our very own apprentices. Thank you, and see you then.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Anne.